Welcome back, everyone. Today we're making a Crescent Crossbody Bag. This bag measures in at 12.5 by 5 with a 4.5 inch depth. It's a super simple design and it's also easy to make. So if you're new to sewing, you should have no problem following the easy step-by-step tutorial. With all that being said, don't forget to grab the printable pattern and let's get started. Getting started with supplies, you need a half yard for your main fabric, and I recommend using a canvas, denim, or twill. These are all very durable fabrics and they're easy to work with. I'm going to be using a heavier weight upholstery. I wanted to give mine a more structured look, and an easy way to do this is using a thicker material. But if you are new to sewing, these fabrics can be a little bit tricky to work with, but like always, get creative with it, test different fabrics, and find something that works for you. You'll need a half a yard for your secondary fabric, and this is going to be for the lining on the inside of the bag. I'm going to be using a lightweight nylon. I found that this is a great fabric to use for the lining. It's very thin, so once you start stacking these layers together, it doesn't get too bulky at the end, and overall it looks really nice on the inside. You'll need one 15-inch zipper. I'm going to be cutting mine off of a zipper roll. I found that this is a great way to go. You reduce a lot of the waste and you can cut your zippers to the precise size. But if you're buying one at the store, I recommend getting at least a 15-inch because we will be snipping the ends after we attach it. You'll need 2 yards of 1 to 1.5 inch width webbing. This is going to be used for the strap. I'm going to be using a 1.5 inch width webbing. It does come down to preference whether you want a thicker or thinner strap. This is something you can kind of play around with because we're going to be making the strap so you can detach it and you can switch it up and add a different strap. So in the end, you can make both 1 and 1.5 inch width straps. In the hardware going along to complete the strap, you'll need 1 strap adjuster, 1 D-ring, 2 lobster clasps, and 2 O-rings. Of course, all these can be switched out for different components, and I'm going to show you that once we start making the strap. The main thing to keep in mind is that you want to match the width of your hardware to the width of your strap. So if you're using a 1-inch width strap, you're going to want to buy 1-inch width hardware. Lastly, you'll need your pattern. This pattern is available at properfitclothing.com. It's super easy to use. All you have to do is download it, print it off, tape it together, and you're ready to go. Before you tape the pattern together, the best thing to do is to cut off the top and one of the side edges. This is going to allow you to overlap the pages for a perfectly aligned pattern. Once you have all your supplies gathered and your pattern printed out, it's time to move into cutting.
And after taping your pattern together, it should look like this. Be sure to check your printer alignment for the best possible results. And from here, we're going to cut on the outside of the black line. And after cutting your fabric, you should end up with 2 bottom main end panels cut out of your main fabric, 1 bottom lining panel cut out of your secondary fabric on the fold, 2 bottom main panels cut out of your main fabric, 4 top main end panels, 2 cut out of your secondary fabric and 2 cut out of your main fabric, 1 pocket panel cut out of your secondary fabric, 4 top main panels, 2 cut out of your secondary fabric and 2 cut out of your main fabric. And lastly, 2 strap end cap panels cut out of leather or vinyl. This panel is optional. We're going to be making a very specific style of strap. If you don't want to make that strap, you don't need to cut out these panels. But if you are choosing to make the strap, then you're going to want to make sure that it's the same width as your webbing. So if you're using 1.5 inch width webbing, then you're going to want to match this panel to your webbing width. Moving on to construction, we're going to start by grabbing the bottom main panel and the bottom main end panels. Separate the panels with right sides facing up, and using the pattern, locate the pleat fold guide. Using chalk, mark these guides on your bottom main panel. Then we're going to fold the fabric starting at the center pleat and moving it towards the outside pleat. If done correctly, it should be the same width as our bottom main end panel. The fabric I'm using is super thick, so I'm going to be placing a few pins after I make the pleat. Place the bottom main end panel directly on top of the pleats, lining up the outside edge and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And for this panel, you really want to make sure it's a 1/4 inch seam allowance because it needs to line up with the bottom lining panel, and if that seam allowance is off just a little bit, it may not line up perfectly with the bottom lining panel. But anyways, locate the seam allowance, and we're going to fold that seam allowance towards the top of the panel away from the pleat and add a top stitch. This stitch will be very noticeable, so I do recommend using a thread color that matches your fabric color. If you are using a thicker fabric like me, the pleat might not show up that great because there's so much structure to the fabric, whereas if I was using a lighter weight fabric, you'd see a nice pleat down the center and it would just look more appealing. But anyways, moving on, we're going to place the right side together, lining up the bottom edge and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After finishing up the stitch, double check, make sure the seam allowance is perfectly a 1/4 inch. If everything is looking good, we're going to move the seam allowance to the right or left and add a top stitch. This is going to complete the main fabric portion of the bottom assembly. Next, we're going to grab the bottom lining panel, unfold the panel, and at this point, you can check to make sure your main fabric assembly is the same size as your bottom lining panel. If everything checks out, we're going to place the wrong sides together, line up the outside edges, and place a few pins. To make it easier in future steps, we're going to be sewing these panels together, but we're not going to sew all the way around the outside edge. We're going to sew the ends and the centers. This will give us enough attachment so in future steps these panels won't be moving around as we're sewing the top main to the bottom main. But definitely if you feel more comfortable sewing all the way around the outside edge, it's no problem, you can totally do that too. As long as the main fabric assembly is moved inward to line up with the curved edges of the lining, you're good to go. But anyways, this will become our full bottom assembly, and for the moment it's totally complete, so we can place it off to the side and grab the pocket panel. The first thing we're going to do is locate the pocket hem guide at the top of the panel. The hem is 1 inch in full, so we're going to fold it in half a ½ inch and then one more ½ inch to complete the full inch. Press it down or add a few pins and then stitch along that top edge, securing the hem down. When it comes to the pocket panel, you can add more than one pocket, so if you want to add pockets on both sides, feel free to make 2 of these pocket panels. For the moment, the pocket is complete, so place it off to the side, grab 2 5-inch strips of webbing and 2 O-rings. I'm using 1½ inch width webbing. Feel free to change this up to any size webbing that works best with your design. The same goes for the O-rings. You don't have to use O-rings, you can use D-rings or any other hardware that the lobster clasps can clip to. But anyways, moving on, we're going to feed the webbing through the O-ring, roll the webbing end over twice so the raw edge is hidden. And you might think these webbing strips are a little bit long, but we want some webbing to work with as we attach it to the bag, and we'll snip the ends later. Repeat the first step for your second webbing strip and O-ring, and then we're going to tack stitch both of these webbing strips down. I do recommend going back and forth a few times with that stitch to really lock that webbing end down. From here, we're going to grab the top main end panel. For this step, we don't need both of the layers, so we can place the secondary fabric off to the side. Separate the main fabric layers with right sides facing up, and then we're going to place the right side of the webbing strip to the right side of the main fabric, lining the webbing strip up in the center of the shorter side. As you can see, the 1½ inch webbing fits perfectly in the center, leaving room for seam allowance, so if you switch your webbing up, make sure there's enough room for the seam allowance. You can also adjust the height by pulling it up or down, and from here we're going to stitch just the top edge as close as you can to that edge. I made my stitch pretty close to the center of the webbing, so that part of the stitch is going to stick out of the bag, so if you don't want that much sticking out, then you can de-thread and readjust. For the moment, we can place these off to the side and grab the top main panels. Separate the panels, and to start, we only need 1 of each, so we can place the 2 other panels off to the side. Using the pattern, locate the zipper edge, and this is going to be the top edge of both of the panels. Grab your 15+ inch zipper, and for this zipper, you just want it to be longer than the width of that top edge. We will be sewing over the zipper and snipping the ends, so just make sure it's longer than the length of that top edge. Place the right side of the zipper to the right side of the main fabric and the wrong side of the zipper to the right side of the secondary fabric, and stitch the top edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After finishing up the stitch, double check both sides, make sure the stitch is a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we're going to fold the wrong sides of the fabric together, place a few pins lining up the outside edge, grab the remaining 2 top main panels, and we're going to do the same thing on the opposite side of the zipper, sandwiching the zipper in between the panels, making sure both sets are lined up perfectly on the zipper, and stitch the top edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Unfold the panels so the wrong sides are together, place a few pins, line up the outside edge. Once you have the outside edges lined up perfectly and the edges that are attached to the zipper, we're going to add a top stitch to both sides of the zipper. This stitch will be very noticeable, so I recommend using an edge presser foot and matching your thread color to your fabric color. And again, it's very important to get these seam allowances correct, or else that end panel won't fit right. At this point, if you cut your zipper from a zipper roll, then it's time to put on the zipper train and move it towards the center of the panel. Slide the panel to the side and grab the top main end panels, both main fabric and secondary fabric. The longer edge of the panel is going to go across the zipper at the innermost point of the top main panel, and we're going to sandwich that top main assembly in between both top main end panels with right sides together. If everything was done correctly in previous steps, the outside edges should line up perfectly. If it is off just a little bit, there's no reason to de-thread, you can just keep going and it should still work out fine. And from here, we're going to place a few pins and stitch both sides at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After finishing up the stitch, we're going to pull the ends out so the wrong sides are together. Repeat this for both sides, and at the moment we're not going to snip the zipper, we're going to wait until the next step to snip the zipper. Once you have the outside edges lined up, place a few pins and add a top stitch to both of those seams. And just like that, the end panels are attached and complete, the zipper is fully locked in. The same goes for this panel. If those end panels are too far in or too far out, it might ruin the circumference and the bottom panel might not line up correctly. Snip the zipper ends flush with the seam allowance. Pull the wrong sides of the end panels back together, and for the webbing, we're going to wait to trim this. Just like we did with the zipper, we want to attach the bottom lining panel before we trim the ends. For the next step, grab the pocket assembly, and we're going to attach it on the bottom edge of either side of the top main assembly on the secondary fabric side. And when it comes to the pocket, you can actually do more than one pocket. You can put them on both sides. You can also put dividers within this pocket or separate pockets all in all. But once you're ready, we're going to stitch it down just like we did the bottom lining panel. We're going to do the sides and just the bottom. We're not going to do the entire bottom edge. We just want to put it in place and stitch it as close as we can to that bottom edge. It just makes it easier and keeps it in place when we sew all these assemblies together. Moving into the final steps, we're going to flip it over to the wrong side, grab the bottom assembly, and we're going to place the right side together. And what I found was the easiest way to do this is line up both of the sides first, pin those down, and then start lining up the curve along the bottom, starting at the center of the curve. Then we're going to pull the opposite side of the top main panel over and line it up with the center of the bottom main assembly. I find doing it this way makes everything lined up, and from here we can add pins all the way around that edge on both sides, and then we're going to stitch all the way around the outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This is the trickiest stitch of the bag, so take your time and try to make those curves as neat as possible. Any sudden movement in that curve can cause a ripple on the outside of the bag. Before moving on, we're going to flip the right sides out, double check both sides, make sure all the layers got stitched together. Really do a thorough inspection. If everything is looking good, then we can flip the wrong sides back out, grab a pair of scissors, and snip the webbing ends flush with the seam allowance. Do the same for the rest of the edges. If you see anything sticking out, trim that edge to make it perfect all the way around. Because for this next step, we're going to be adding double fold bias tape to clean up that raw edge, and I'm going to walk you through a few different ways you can do this, whether you're a beginner or advanced. The first method is using a bias tape making kit. In this technique, you make your own double-sided bias tape to the size and fabric you want to use. All you do is cut your strips, feed it through your folder, and press it when it comes out the folder. It's very easy to do, and you get to customize the bias tape to your exact measurements. The second technique is using a double fold bias tape binder. This is the most efficient technique. You cut your strips, feed it through your binder, and sew it directly to your raw edge. And the last technique is using pre-made double fold bias tape. You are limited to colors, but it's very easy to use. You fold it over the edge and stitch it down. And you want to make sure you apply it all the way around the outside edge. And I'm using the bias tape attachment. This is a great way to go if you plan on making a lot of bags. It gives me perfect bias tape every time, and then I also get to match the fabric on the inside so it looks very nice. If you plan on making a lot of bags, I highly recommend this method. For this specific bag, I left the bias tape going past the ends because I didn't want to go around that harsh corner, so I'm going to roll those ends over and tack stitch them down. And I added a stitch across the entire side because that's also going to lock that webbing down just one more time to give it extra security. Flip the right sides back out, and I really want to quickly go over, as you can see that curve got a little bit nicer because this bias tape does add a little bit of structure on that seam, pushing it outward, giving it a more full, complete look. But real quick, I do want to say if you don't want to add the bias tape, you don't need to. It's not mandatory. If you plan on selling these, you may want to add it. But moving it to the final step, it's branding. Typically, I wait till the end to add the branding, but since the bag is done, we're going to quickly add it before we begin making the strap. I added leather strips that were attached with double-sided rivets. I also added one on the zipper to make a zipper pull. And the fun thing about this, you can put these anywhere, and these also double up as clips so I can clip different things to them. But anyways, moving on, we're going to grab the strap end cap panels. And again, this is optional. If you don't want to make this style of strap, you can skip ahead. I have two different sizes cut. This is because I want to show you how you can switch it up for different width webbings, because the main goal is to have the end cap a touch wider than the webbing. So technically for this strap part, you can have it as wide as you want when it comes to the webbing, as long as that end cap is wider. When it comes to the notch, this is going to be adjusted so that it fits your hardware. So essentially what we're doing is reducing the size so it fits through the opening of the hardware. So this part can be adjusted to the same size as the hardware you're using. Since this is a detachable strap, the hardware does need a release so it can clip around the O-rings on the bag. If you don't plan on making it detachable, you can either sew the webbing directly to the O-rings, or you feed the end cap through the O-ring instead of going through the hardware. And then you continue on with the next steps. There are a few different ways you can attach the end cap to the webbing. You can either sew it on. Since I'm using a thicker leather, I'm going to be using double-sided rivets, and that's what I'm going to cover in the next steps. And grab our 1 to 2 yards of 1.5 inch to 1 inch width webbing. Going along with the webbing, you'll need one strap adjuster, and this is a 1.5 inch strap adjuster to match my 1.5 inch width webbing. Start by feeding the webbing through the opening and sliding it down about 1 to 2 feet. The next thing we're going to add is a D-ring, and this is a 1.5 inch D-ring. Slide it on the same end as the strap adjuster. Pull some slack out of the strap adjuster and feed that same end back through the openings on the bottom side. Pull the end out about 4 inches, roll the end over, and pin it down. Make sure you're giving yourself enough room so you can reach it with the sewing machine. Before we add the stitch, we're going to cut one more 6 inch strip of webbing. And we're also going to feed this one through the D-ring, roll the end over once or twice, pin it down. With both sides pinned down and ready, we're going to add a tack stitch to both of the webbing ends. Just like that, the adjustable portion of the strap is complete. Feel free to try it on and see how big it is. If it's way too big, you can de-thread it, trim it down, and re-sew it. Going along with the leather ends, I'll be using dog leash clips. You can get these in various sizes and colors. Slide the end caps through the bottom opening of the clip, move it to the center, and fold the ends over. Place the webbing end in between the two layers, and there's a few different ways you can attach this. You can add a box stitch, or you can use double-sided rivets. And that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be punching 4 holes with the hole punch, and using 10mm double-sided rivets to secure it down. Feel free to change up the size depending on the thickness of your material. Then we're going to feed the rivet through each opening, add the backs. To finish it off, I'll be using a hand press, and you can use a hand press, pliers, or even a hammer die. The goal is to smush those two sides towards the center to lock all the layers together. If you want to make it extra strong, you can add more rivets, or you can even add a tack stitch up front. This is a very specific style of strap. I think it's more on the luxury side. That's why I wanted to make this style of strap. You could switch it out for a different style, or make something that works better with your fabric. Like I said before, if you don't want to add the clips, then you're going to attach it directly to the O-rings on the bag, either using the end caps or just using the webbing. And at this point, you can try it on with the bag attached, see how it fits, make adjustments to the strap if needed. The great thing about this is that you can change this hardware out for any style of hardware, and it really gives a different look to the bag, so there's really endless possibilities. The other fun thing about this is that you can take the strap off if you don't like the look, and you can change it out for different straps, add different bags. You can essentially design a whole fanny pack collection that you can swap out the straps and really change up your look every day. But like always, get creative with it, test different fabrics, test different straps, and let us know how they work in the comments.
And there you have it, your Crescent Crossbody Bag is complete. Hopefully yours turned out great. Sometimes they don't always turn out on your first try, but that's the thing with sewing. The more you do it, the better you'll get, and the better your bags will start turning out. Like always, I want to see what you come up with, so tag me on Instagram at Properfit Clothing, and until then, I'm going to keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.